So in this tutorial, we're going to talk about inheritance in Java, and we're going to study very important concepts in Java. We're going to study the basics of inheritance. We will study member access specifiers, then method overriding, then using final with inheritance, then the constructor's execution. So first of all, I will give you a very good example of an interview, and we are going to use that example to show all of these features of inheritance. So first of all, the question that comes in our mind is, why do we need inheritance? So why inheritance? So here is the example. So let's suppose there is an interview and we have an interviewer. So here is an interviewer, and let's suppose there are two programmers that have come for the interview. One is the programmer P1 and another one is the programmer P2. So let us consider that the programmer P1 does not have knowledge of inheritance, whereas the programmer P2 is well versed with the knowledge of inheritance. So the interviewer starts asking a question from the programmer 1. He gives a task to the programmer 1. He says that let's suppose we have a class student defined like this. So you can see that this class student has some member variables. You can see that here are 4 variables, which is roll number, marks, gender, address, and a function display which displays a detail of the student. So the interviewer says he gives a task to the programmer 1 that you are given this class student, and now you will have to create a class tournaments, and this class tournaments will have all the variables and this function display also. So this class tournament will have all of these members and member variables of the class student, plus it will have some more features, like it will have one extra variable which is in tournaments and one extra function which is void calculate tournaments. So the programmer 1 is given this task. So what he does is he simply writes all of these functions as it is here, and he adds the extra feature to it. So let me just write the whole program here. So as you can see in this code, we have all the members which were also available in this class student, and we have an additional member in tournaments here. We have the void display function which was also there in the student class, but in this class we have an extra function which is calculate t. So the interviewer gives a remark to the programmer 1. He says that you have already initialized all of these variables in this class, and now you're again initializing it here. So this is basically a code duplicacy, or you can say the duplicate code. So this duplicates this code that is having multiple instances, or you can say that this is a duplicate code, so it is going to take a lot of memory space. You can see that if this function display is a very long function, you will have to create that function again in this class. So this poses a problem because you are initializing them again in this class. If it is already there here, you can see that these members and this function is already available in the class student. You're again doing that, you're again creating them in this class. So this makes your code duplicate. The programmer 2 is given the same task, and he knows the concept of inheritance. He explains the concept of inheritance to the interviewer. He says that let's suppose we have a parent class, or let's suppose we have a parent. So in inheritance, let's suppose we have a parent which has some features. and features are basically the members or the member functions. So now if we want to create a child, or let's suppose this parent has a child, or let's suppose it has two children. Now what these two children will have some features that they have inherited from the class or from the parent. So let's suppose if we have a parent which has some hair color, some skin color, then the child has some of the features of the parent plus some more features of their own. So this concept of real life inheritance can be applied into programming, which is an OOPS concept. So it comes into an OOPS concept. So you can apply this inheritance. You can see that here I have explained inheritance, and that's what programmer P2 has explained to the interviewer. The programmer 2 can easily see that in this case, this class student is acting as a parent class, and this class is acting as a subclass or the derived class or the child class. So this class student has some features. You can see that they have some variables and some member functions, and similarly there is class tournaments, and it has some additional functions and additional member variables. So basically this class tournament is a child class which is going to inherit some or all of the properties of this class student, and it will add some more features to it. So what the programmer P2 does is it uses inheritance, and if you want to inherit the members of a particular class, what you will have to do is you will have to use a reserved keyword which is extends. So extends basically means that you are going to extend the features of the student class. So now you are going to write the student class here. So what basically we are doing here is we are inheriting the properties of student. So whenever you will create an object of this class tournaments in the main function, you can use that object to access these function and variables. So you do not need to redefine or rewrite them in this tournaments class. What you can do is just write the additional features in this class. So what I'm just going to do here, I'm going to write here int tournaments, and I'm going to define this whole void calculate function here. So this is void calculate tournaments, and here you will display the tournaments. So you can see here that we have made the code more compact by just extending our base class. So the parent can also be known as a base class or a super class, and the child can be known as a derived class or a subclass. So here you can see that instead of writing all of these members and redefining all the functions again and again in other classes, you can extend the features of a particular class using this extends keyword. So the programmer 2 has made the code more compact and efficient. So now the interviewer gives programmer 2 another task. He says that I do not want that this marks field, you can see that this is the marks. So let's suppose we have a main function here. So let's suppose this is the main function, and inside this main function, let's suppose I create an object of this tournaments class, tournaments t equals to new tournaments. So what you can do is, let's suppose you want to call, or you want to call this display function. So the easiest way is to just use the object of this class and use a dot operator and then display function. So you can see that we have not even created this display function in this tournaments class, but since it is extended, it extends the properties of the class student, it is visible in this class tournament. So you can actually use the object of this subclass or the child class to call the member functions or the members of the super or the parent class. So now the interviewer gives a task to programmer 2. He says that if you can access the members of the super class, then that means that you can also access the marks of the student class. So you can do something like this. So t.marks equals to, let's say, 20. So you can use the object of the subclass t to assign the marks of this student. But the interviewer says that it should not be like this. He says to the programmer 2 that you will have to do something so that the outsider or the user who is using this whole program will not be able to assign or access this marks variable using the object of this subclass. So then there comes the member access specifiers. So the programmer P2 is well versed with the member access specifiers. There are basically three types of member access specifiers. They are also known as the visibility modes. So I'm going to write here three specifiers, which is public, private, and protected. So you can use these, any one of these. These are also the reserved keywords followed by a semicolon to make a particular variable as private, public, or protected. So let's discuss about each of them. So if you have declared any particular variable as public, let's suppose I have written public int roll number. So this means that this roll number variable is accessible inside this class. It is also accessible in this class also. So you can access this roll number using the object of the inherited class or the child class. So the programmer, since it has it is being given a task to hide this member marks. So what he's going to do is he's going to make it private. So once you have made this marks as private, it cannot be accessed by any of the subclasses. So if you have made this variable as private, you cannot assign using the object of the subclass. So this will just give you an error. So in this manner you can also specify, or you can restrict the object of this tournaments class to, or the object of this tournaments class to avoid using or assigning values to the variables of the superclass. So this basically means that if you will assign any member as private, you cannot use it outside this class. So it is accessible to the functions. Let's suppose this is a void display function, so it can access this marks variable, but the tournaments class cannot access that variable. So let's discuss about the protected one. So let's suppose I have made the gender as protected. So whenever you declare a variable as protected, then this means that you cannot access this variable outside this class. So you cannot use the object of this class to access the gender variable, but you can inherit this variable inside the subclasses. So that means that the tournament class can make use of this gender class but in its own function. So if you have made any particular member protected, then means that it can be inherited, but it becomes private in the subclass. So in this manner, if you will declare any variable as protected using the protected member access specifier or the visibility mode protected, then you cannot use that variable outside this class that is actually a private also, but you can inherit this variable in this subclass. So you cannot inherit the private members. So these are the public, private and protected member access specifiers. Now the interviewer gives another task to P2 or the programmer 2. He says that I want to define a function display in the class tournaments, but this function display has its own implementation. That means that this function will display roll number, marks, gender and address, which this function is also doing. But in this class, in this subclass, it will also display the number of tournaments that a student has played. So we want to create a function which has the same name as it has in the superclass or in the parent class, but we want to have a different implementation. So the interviewer asks P2 that if he will write a function here with its own implementation in this tournaments class. So what will happen if you will call the display function like this? Which display function is this line going to call? Is it going to call this function, or is it going to call the function that is there in the parent class? Because you can access this parent class function also, because you are extending the properties of the class student. So the answer by programmer 2 is method overriding. So whenever you will create a function call like this, it will override the base class. And it will run the function which is displayed by the object of this class. So you can see that the tournaments class has object T, and whenever I'm using the dot display function, it is not going to take this display function into consideration. It is going to override this, and it will display, and it will just call this one which is in the subclass. So this is known as method overriding, and it is a runtime polymorphism. So I am going to write here runtime polymorphism, and we know that the concept of polymorphism is very simple. You're going to use the same name but with different implementations, and it is runtime because this overriding of function of the base class happens when your program is actually running, because the calling of the function will happen only when you are running your program. So that's the answer from programmer 2. Now the interviewer asks a problem or asks a particular question from programmer 1. he asked that what will happen if we are not going to extend this class. So let's suppose we are not extending this class, right? So what the programmer one has done is, programmer one has done this part. So he says that let's suppose in this code I want to change the address of the student. So the programmer one says that if you want to change the address of student, you can create an object of the student class, and then you can change it using a call like this. But there is a problem, because string address is also there in the class tournaments. You can see here. So this is another problem. If you're not using inheritance, you will have to update each of the variable or the members in all the classes. But if you are inheriting, you will just need to update this variable and it is visible in all the subclasses. So now the interviewer asks another problem from the programmer too. He says that now I do not want this function to run. He says that the display function defined in the class tournaments, I don't want this function to run. I want the display function which is in the superclass to run. So how can I do that? So the programmer says that you can use a final keyword. So if you will use a final keyword in front of this function, then at the runtime this function will not override. So you will be able to run this program, and so no implementation will be there in the subclass. So once we have written final in front of a member, you can make it constant. If you are making a function as final, that means you cannot override it. That means it cannot have further implementations in the subclasses. So this is the second use of final. The third use of final is you can write final in front of a class. So when you will write final in front of a class, you cannot extend its feature. So you can use final for three things. One, you can use it to make a particular member as a constant so that no other code can change its value. Then you can use it in front of a method so that it will not get override at the time of execution, as you can see here. The third use, if you do not want a particular class to get inherited, or if you want to prevent inheritance, you can write final in front of it. So that's the use of final keyword. Next, the programmer 2 is given another task by the interviewer. The interviewer says that, okay, let's suppose we have created some constructors in the class student, and we have also created some constructors in the class tournaments. So if I will create an object of this class tournaments, so it should be like this. So if you will create a object of this class tournaments, then which constructor will be called first? The constructor which is there in the class in this subclass, or the constructor which is there in the superclass, which will be called first? Then the programmer 2 gives a very intuitive example to the interviewer. He says that let's consider a construction of a house. So if you want to construct a house, you will first have to construct the lowest floor, then you will have to construct the next floor, and then you go up like this. So the construction works like this. So similarly, you can apply this concept in computer programming. If you want to construct the objects, or let's suppose you want to create a constructor in class student, so the constructor of the base class is called first, and then the constructor of the derived classes will be called one by one. So that's how constructors execution takes place. So in this tutorial we have covered inheritance concept, some of the very important concepts which is use of final keyword, method overriding, use of member access specifiers. So I will suggest you to write this code and play around with these method or the member access specifiers. Try method overriding and try to use final keyword and see what will happen, which function will run first. And in this manner you will be able to master the concept of inheritance. So thanks for watching.